About Theosophy articles by H. P. Blavatsky. What is Theosophy? What are the Theosophists? Is Theosophy a religion? Let every man prove his own work. H. P. Blavatsky Series No. 5 Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd Bangalore 560,004. Objects of the Theosophical movement: I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. The articles of H. P. Blavatsky and W. Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by T. Iv. Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. Reprint edition, 1981 RT/TF, TRR / by courtesy, The Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California, 90007 USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560,009, and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560,004. Madame Blavatsky arrived in India in January, 1879. In less than a year she founded the first theosophical magazine, The Theosophist, of which the first issue appeared in October. It soon became apparent that this journal was to be a vehicle of explanations of the meaning and purpose of the theosophical movement, and to place on record basic examples of the religio-philosophical inquiry that has occupied searchers for truth throughout history. The obvious business of such an organ would be to undertake definitions. Accordingly, the first issue, dated October, 1879, contained articles addressed to the questions, what is Theosophy, and what are the Theosophists? The importance of such clarifying discussions becomes evident when it is realized that Col. Alcott, who with William Q. Judge was associated with HPB from the beginning, was by no means aware of the scope of the project she envisioned, and all that was involved. Alcott thought of the Society as primarily a body devoted to occult research, while HPB planned a great movement of moral reform which would labor unceasingly for the brotherhood of man. In a letter to Alcott, dated December 6, 1887, she reviewed for Alcott the high intent of the movement, saying, "The Society was formed, then gradually made to merge into and evolve hints of the teachings from the secret doctrine of the oldest school of occult philosophy in the whole world, a school to reform which, finally, the Lord Gautama was made to appear. These teachings could not be given abruptly. They had to be instilled gradually." Save for a few scattered articles which appeared earlier in spiritualist journals in the United States, Isis Unveiled, the 2-volume work published in 1877, was H.P.B.'s initial expression of theosophical ideas. Drawing upon the resources of both science and religion to show the reality of laws of intellectual and spiritual evolution, in addition to what science was disclosing in regard to physical and organic evolution, H.P.B. intended Isis Unveiled as an introduction to the fuller treatments of the processes of individual and social regeneration which she planned for subsequent publication. As the reader will see, the articles which appeared in her magazines, first The Theosophist, then Lucifer, were essential elements in this program, to be completed, finally, with publication of The Secret Doctrine, 1888, The Key to Theosophy, 1889, and The Voice of the Silence, 1889. What is Theosophy? Immediately declares the comprehensive meaning of Theosophy as a word to characterize the age-old longing of men to find and know the truth. The scope of Theosophy, so conceived, eliminates any possibility of sectarianism in authentic expressions of the theosophical movement, setting a difficult ideal for fallible human beings to live up to. Yet on this objective HPB never compromised, making it clear that the ideal of human perfectibility could never be achieved so long as men remain satisfied with less than universal truth. There is a sense in which the study of Theosophy becomes a means of learning how the individual, while still imperfect and subject to error, may nonetheless preserve a true idea of this goal and be content with nothing less. What Are the Theosophists embodies instruction on this theme, showing the folly of supposing that any human association can be more than a body of seekers. In its highest meaning, in its fruition, Theosophy is defined as spiritual knowledge itself, the very essence of philosophical and theistic inquiry. An organization of people calling themselves Theosophists can have no dogmas, no creeds, and is ideally an association of explorers rather than believers. In this search, the guides are all the great teachers of history. And HPB made it her role to give an extraordinarily extended introduction to the vast resource of literature and tradition in which the spiritual inquiries of mankind are embodied. HPB came to England to stay in May 1887. Again she started a theosophical magazine, Lucifer, which soon became her own organ of militant expression. With some 12 years of experience behind her in work for Theosophy, she now took up matters of prejudice and misconceptions of Theosophy and pressed upon her readers the far-reaching challenge in Theosophy to both religious orthodoxy and conventional scientific opinion. It was not enough, moreover, to present in modern terms the content of ancient philosophical religion. The distortions and corruptions of religious teachings had to be explained. In Is Theosophy a Religion?, published in LWC/E/4 November 1888, HPB made an often quoted statement: "Theosophy, we say, is not a religion, but religion itself." She explains the decline of great religious movements and the transformation of their original inspiration into narrow claims of exclusive revelation, ending, finally, in superstition, not by a condemnation of evil men but by an account of the laws of spiritual communication and the almost insuperable difficulties imposed by the ordinary human condition on faithful transmission of spiritual truth. This article points to the duty of Theosophists in working toward a general understanding of these problems. Let every man prove his own work makes clear the relationship between the theosophical movement and labors of charity and social reform. There is no rejection of Theosophists. Indeed, attempts to lessen the burdens of poverty and want should be the natural fruit of theosophical understanding, yet the doing of material good involves psychological and moral mysteries that have to be understood if the works of philanthropists and reformers are to bear enduring fruit. In this article, which appeared in Lucifer for November 1887, HPB accepts the judgment of honest critics, at the same time drawing attention to the failure of powerful and wealthy religious orthodoxies to practice their professed ethics. The burden of this article is that knowledge is an essential of truly practical philanthropy. What is Theosophy? His question has been so often asked, and misconception so widely prevails, that the editors of a journal devoted to an exposition of the world's theosophy would be remiss were its first number issued without coming to a full understanding with their readers. But our heading involves two further queries: what is the Theosophical Society, and what are the Theosophists? To each an answer will be given. According to lexicographers, the term Theosophia is composed of two Greek words, theos, God, and sophos, wise. So far, correct. But the explanations that follow are far from giving a clear idea of Theosophy. Webster defines it most originally as a supposed intercourse with God and superior spirits, and consequent attainment of superhuman knowledge, by physical processes, as by the theurgic operations of some ancient Platonists, or by the chemical processes of the German fire philosophers. This, to say the least, is a poor and flippant explanation. To attribute such ideas to men like Ammonius Saccas, Plotinus, Jamblichus, Porphyry, Proclus shows either intentional misrepresentation, or Mr. Webster's ignorance of the philosophy and motives of the greatest geniuses of the later Alexandrian school. To impute to those whom their contemporaries as well as posterity styled Didactoi, God taught a purpose to develop their psychological, spiritual perceptions by physical processes, is to describe them as materialists. As to the concluding fling at the fire philosophers, it rebounds from them to fall home among our most eminent modern men of science, those, in whose mouths the Rev. James Martineau places the following boast: matter is all we want, give us atoms alone, and we will explain the universe. Vaughan offers a far better, more philosophical definition. A theosophist, he says, is one who gives you a theory of God or the works of God, which has not revelation, but an inspiration of his own for its basis. In this view every great thinker and philosopher, especially every founder of a due religion, school of philosophy, or sect, is necessarily a theosophist. Hence, Theosophy and Theosophists have existed ever since the first glimmering of nascent thought made man seek instinctively for the means of expressing his own independent opinions. There were Theosophists before the Christian era, notwithstanding that Christian writers ascribe the development of the eclectic theosophical system to the early part of the 3rd century of their era. Diogenes Laertius traces Theosophy to an epoch antedating the dynasty of the Ptolemies, and names as its founder an Egyptian hierophant called Potamuon, the name being Coptic and signifying a priest consecrated to Amun, the god of wisdom. But history shows it revived by Ammonius Saccas, the founder of the Neoplatonic school. He and his disciples called themselves Philhellethians, lovers of the truth, while others termed them the analogists, on account of their method of interpreting Gal's sacred legends, symbolical myths and mysteries purely of analogy or correspondence, so that events which had occurred in the external world were regarded as expressing operations and experience of the human soul. It was the aim and purpose of Ammonius to reconcile all sects, peoples, and nations under one common faith of belief in one supreme eternal, unknown, and unnamed power, governing the universe by immutable and eternal laws. His object was to prove a primitive system of theosophy, which at the beginning was essentially alike in all countries, to induce all men to lay aside their strifes and quarrels, and unite in purpose and thought as the children of one common mother, to purify the ancient religions, by degrees corrupted and obscured, from all dross of human element, by uniting and expounding them upon pure philosophical principles. Hence, the Buddhistic, Vedantic and Magian, or Zoroastrian, systems were taught in the eclectic theosophical school along with all the philosophies of Greece. Hence also, the preeminently Buddhistic and Indian feature among the ancient Theosophists and Alexandria, of due reverence for parents and aged persons, a fraternal affection for the whole human race, and a compassionate feeling for even dumb animals. While seeking to establish a system of moral discipline which enforced upon people the duty to live according to the laws of their respective countries, to exalt their minds by the research and contemplation of the one absolute truth, his chief object in order, as he believed, to achieve all others, was to extract from the various religious teachings, as from a many-chorded instrument, one full and harmonious melody, which would find response in every truth-loving heart. Theosophy is, then, the archaic wisdom religion, the esoteric doctrine once known in every ancient country having claims to civilization. This wisdom all the old writings show us as an emanation of the divine principle, and the clear comprehension of it is typified in such names as the Indian Bud, the Babylonian Nebo. The Thoth of Memphis, the Hermes of Greece, in the appellations, also, of some goddesses Metis, Netha, Athena, the Gnostic Sophia, and finally the Vedas, from the word to know under this designation, all the ancient philosophers of the East and West, the hierophants of Old Egypt, the rishis of Aryabhart, the Theodidactoi of Greece, included all knowledge of things occult and essentially divine. The Merkava of the Hebrew rabbis, the secular and popular series, were thus designated as only the vehicle, the outward shell which contained the higher esoteric knowledge. The Magi of Zoroaster received instruction and were initiated in the caves and secret lodges of Bactria. The Egyptian and Grecian hierophants had their aperita, or secret discourses, during which the Mista became an epopta asir. The central idea of the eclectic theosophy was that of a simple supreme essence, unknown and unknowable, for how could one know the knower, as inquires Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Their system was characterized by three distinct features: the theory of the above-named essence, the doctrine of the human soul and emanation from the latter, hence of the same nature, and its theurgy. It is this last science which has led the Neoplatonists to be so misrepresented in our era of materialistic science. Theurgy being essentially the art of applying the divine powers of man to the subordination of the blind forces of nature, its votaries were first termed magicians, a corruption of the word mag, signifying a wise, or learned man, and derided. Skeptics of a century ago would have been as wide of the mark if they had laughed at the idea of a phonograph or telegraph. The ridiculed and the infidels of one generation generally become the wise men and saints of the next. As regards the divine essence and the nature, the soul and spirit, modern theosophy believes now as ancient theosophy did. The popular Dao of the Aryan nations was identical with the Iao of the Chaldeans, and even with the Jupiter of the less learned and philosophical among the Romans, and it was just as identical with the J alive of the Samaritans, the Tiu or Tiasco of the Northmen, the Da of the Britons, and T li Zeus of the Thracians. As to the absolute essence, the one and all, whether we accept the Greek Pythagorean, the Chaldean Kabbalistic, or the Aryan philosophy in regard to it, it will lead to one and the same result. The primeval monad of the Pythagorean system, which retires into darkness and is itself darkness, for human intellect, was made the basis of all things, and we can find the idea in all its integrity in the philosophical systems of Leibniz and Spinoza. Therefore, whether a theosophist agrees with the Kabbalah, which, speaking offensive, propounds the query, who, then, can comprehend it since it is formless, and non-existent? Or, remembering that magnificent hymn from the Rig Veda, hymn 129th, book 10th, inquires, who knows from whence this great creation sprang? Whether his will created or was mute? He knows it, or perchance even he knows not, or again, accepts the Vedantic conception of Brahma, who in the Upanishads is represented as without life, without mind, pure, unconscious, for Brahma is absolute consciousness, or, even finally, siding with the Svabhavikas of Nepal, maintains that nothing exists but Svabhavit, substance or nature, which exists by itself without any creator. Any one of the above conceptions can lead but to pure and absolute theosophy, that theosophy which prompted such men as Hegel, Fichte, and Spinoza to take up the labors of the old Grecian philosophers and speculate upon the one substance, the deity, the divine, all proceeding from the divine wisdom, incomprehensible, unknown and unnamed by any ancient or modern religious philosophy, with the exception of Christianity and Mohammedanism. Every theosophist, then, holding to a theory of the deity which has not revelation, but an inspiration of his own for its basis, may accept any of the above definitions or belong to any of these religions, and yet remain strictly within the boundaries of theosophy. For the latter is belief in the deity as the all, the source of all existence, the infinite that cannot be either comprehended or known, the universe alone revealing it, or, as some prefer it, him, thus giving a sex to that, to anthropomorphize which is blasphemy. True, theosophy shrinks from brutal materialization. It prefers believing that, from eternity retired within itself, the spirit of the deity neither wills nor creates, but that, from the infinite effulgency everywhere going forth from the great center, that which produces all visible and invisible things, is but a ray containing in itself the generative and conceptive power, which, in its turn, produces that which the Greeks called macrocosm, the Kabbalists 77 Aatw or Adam Kadmon the archetypal man, and the Aryans Purusha, the manifested Brahm, or the divine male. Theosophy believes also in the anastasis or continued existence, and in transmigration, evolution, or a series of changes in the soul, one which can be defended and explained on strict philosophical principles, and only by making a distinction between Paramatma, transcendental, supreme soul, and Jivatma, animal, or conscious soul, of the Vedantins. To fully define Theosophy, we must consider it under all its aspects. The interior world has not been hidden from all by impenetrable darkness. By that higher intuition acquired by Theosophia or God knowledge, which carried the mind from the world of form into that of formless spirit, man has been sometimes enabled in every age and every country to perceive things in the interior or invisible world. Hence, the Samadhi, or Dhyanyog Samadhi, of the Hindu ascetics, the Dhyanyaphoda, or spiritual illumination of the Neoplatonists, the sidereal confabulation of soul, of the Rosicrucians or fire philosophers, and, even the ecstatic trance of mystics and of the modern mesmerists and spiritualists, are identical in nature, though various as to manifestation. The search after man's diviner self, so often and so erroneously interpreted as individual communion with a personal God, was the object of every mystic, and belief in its possibility seems to have been coeval with the genesis of humanity, each people giving it another name. Thus Plato and Plotinus call noetic work that which the Yogin and the Kshatriya term vidya. By reflection, self-knowledge and intellectual discipline, the soul can be raised to the vision of eternal truth, goodness, and beauty, that is, to the vision of God. This is the epopteia, said the Greeks. To unite one soul to the universal soul, says Porphyry, requires but a perfectly pure mind. Through self-contemplation, perfect chastity, and purity of body, we may approach nearer to it, and receive, in that state, true knowledge and wonderful insight. And Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who has read neither Phryry nor other Greek authors, but who is a thorough Vedic scholar, says in his Veda Bhashya, Upasana Prakaru Ank 9, to obtain Dikshare, highest initiation, and Yog, one has to practice according to one. In a series of articles entitled The World's Great Theosophists, we intend showing that from Pythagoras, who got his wisdom in India, down to our best known modern philosophers and theosophists David Hume, and Shelley, the English poet. The Spiritists of France included many believed and yet believe in metempsychosis or reincarnation of the soul, however unelaborated the system of the Spiritists may fairly be regarded. The rules. The soul in human body can perform the greatest wonders by knowing the universal spirit, or God, and acquainting itself with the properties and qualities, occult, of all the things in the universe. A human being, a dikshit or initiate, can thus acquire a power of seeing and hearing at great distances. Finally, Alfred R. Wallace, FRS, a spiritualist and yet a confessedly great naturalist, says, with brave candor, it is spirit that alone feels and perceives and thinks, that acquires knowledge, and reasons and aspires. There not unfrequently occur individuals so constituted that the spirit can perceive independently of the corporeal organs of sense, or can perhaps, wholly or partially, quit the body for a time and return to it again. The spirit communicates with spirit easier than with matter. We can now see how, after thousands of years have intervened between the age of gymnosophists II and our own highly civilized era, notwithstanding, or, perhaps, just because of such an enlightenment which pours its radiant light upon the psychological as well as upon the physical realms of nature, over 20 millions of people today believe, under a different form, in those same spiritual powers that were believed in by the Yogins and the Pythagoreans, nearly 3,000 years ago. Thus, while the Aryan mystic claimed for himself the power of solving all the problems of life and death, when he had once obtained the power of acting independently of his body, through the Atman self, or soul, and the old Greeks went in search of Atmu, the hidden one, or the God soul of man, with the symbolical mirror of the Thesmophorian mysteries, so the spiritualists of today believe in the faculty of thespirits, or the souls of the disembodied persons, to communicate visibly and tangibly with those they loved on earth. And all these, Aryan Yogins, Greek philosophers, and modern spiritualists, affirm that possibility on the ground that the embodied soul and its never-embodied spirit, the real self, are not separated from either the universal soul or other spirits by space, but merely by the differentiation of their qualities, as in the boundless expanse of the universe there can be no limitation. And that when this difference is once removed according to the Greeks and Aryans by abstract contemplation, producing the temporary liberation of the imprisoned soul, and according to spiritualists, through mediumship such an union between embodied and disembodied spirits becomes possible. Thus was it that Patanjali's to the reality of the Yog power was affirmed by many Greek and Roman writers, who call the Yogins Indian gymnosophists, by Strabo, Lucan, Plutarch, Cicero, Tusculum, Pliny, 7, 2, etc. Yogins and, following in their steps, Plotinus, Porphyry, and other Neoplatonists, maintained that in their hours of ecstasy, they had been united to, or rather become as one with God, several times during the course of their lives. This idea, erroneous as it may seem in its application to the universal spirit, was, and is, claimed by too many great philosophers to be put aside as entirely chimerical. In the case of the Theodidactoi, the only controvertible point, the dark spot on this philosophy of extreme mysticism, was its claim to include that which is simply ecstatic illumination, under the head of sensuous perception. In the case of the Yogins, who maintained their ability to see Iswara face to face, this claim was successfully overthrown by the stern logic of Kapila. As to the similar assumption made for their Greek followers, for a long array of Christian ecstatics, and, finally, for the last two claimants to God seeing within these last 100 years, Jacob Boehme and Swedenborg, this pretension would and should have been philosophically and logically questioned, if a few of our great men of science who are spiritualists had more interest in the philosophy than in the mere phenomenalism of spiritualism. The Alexandrian Theosophists were divided into neophytes, initiates, and masters, or hierophants, and their rules were copied from the ancient mysteries of Orpheus, who, according to Herodotus, brought them from India. Ammonius obligated his disciples by oath not to divulge his higher doctrines, except to those who were proved thoroughly worthy and initiated, and who had learned to regard the gods, the angels, and the demons of other peoples, according to the esoteric hyponia, or undermeaning. The gods exist, but they are not what the hoi polloi, the uneducated multitude, suppose them to be, says Epicurus. He is not an atheist who denies the existence of the gods whom the multitude worship, but he is such who fastens on these gods the opinions of the multitude. In his turn, Aristotle declares that of the divine essence pervading the whole world of nature, what are styled the gods are simply the first principles. Plotinus, the pupil of the god-taught Ammonius, tells us that the secret gnosis or the knowledge of Theosophy, has 3 degrees: opinion, science, and illumination. The means or instrument of the first is sense, or perception, of the second, dialectics, of the third, intuition. To the last, reason is subordinate, it is absolute knowledge, founded on the identification of the mind with the object known. Theosophy is the exact science of psychology, so to say, it stands in relation to natural, uncultivated mediumship, as the knowledge of a Tyndall stands to that of a schoolboy in physics. It develops in man a direct beholding, that which Schelling denominates a realization of the identity of subject and object in the individual, so that under the influence and knowledge of hyponia man thinks divine thoughts, views all things as they really are, and, finally, becomes recipient of the soul of the world, to use one of the finest expressions of Emerson. I, the imperfect, adore my own perfect, he says in his superb essay on the oversouled. Besides this psychological, or soul state, Theosophy cultivated every branch of sciences and arts. It was thoroughly familiar with what is now commonly known as mesmerism. Practical theurgy or ceremonial magic, so often resorted to in their exorcisms by the Roman Catholic clergy, was discarded by the Theosophists. It is but Jamliches alone who, transcending the other eclectics, added to Theosophy the doctrine of theurgy. When ignorant of the true meaning of the esoteric divine symbols of nature, man is apt to miscalculate the powers of his soul, and, instead of communing spiritually and mentally with higher, celestial beings, the good spirits, the gods of the theurgists of the Platonic school, he will unconsciously call forth the evil, dark powers which lurk around humanity undying, grim creations of human crimes and vices, and thus fall from Triurgia, white magic, into Goetia, or black magic, sorcery. Yet, neither white, nor black magic are what popular superstition understands by the terms. The possibility of raising spirits according to the key of Solomon, is the height of superstition and ignorance. Purity of deed and thought can alone raise us to an intercourse with the gods and attain for us the goal we desire. Alchemy, believed by so many to have been a spiritual philosophy as well as physical science, belonged to the teachings of the Theosophical school. It is a noticeable fact that neither Zoroaster, Buddha, Orpheus, Pythagoras, Confucius, Socrates, nor Ammonius Saccas, committed anything to writing. The reason for it is obvious. Theosophy is a double-edged weapon and unfit for the ignorant or the selfish. Like every ancient philosophy, it has its votaries among the moderns, but, until late in our own days, its disciples were few in numbers, and of the most various sects and opinions. Entirely speculative, and founding no school, they have still exercised a silent influence upon philosophy, and no doubt, when the time arrives, many ideas thus silently propounded may yet give new directions to human thought, remarks Mr. Kenneth R. H. Mackenzie 9°, himself a mystic and a theosophist, in his large and valuable work, The Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, Articles Theosophical Society of New York and Theosophy, p. 731. Since the days of the fire philosophers, they had never formed themselves into societies, for, tracked like wild beasts by the Christian clergy, to be known as a theosophist often amounted, hardly a century ago, to a death warrant. The statistics show that during a period of 1 so years no less than 90,000 men and women were burned in Europe for alleged witchcraft. In Great Britain only, from a.d.1640 to 1660, but 20 years, 3,000 persons were put to death for compact with the devil. It was but late in the present century, in 1875, that some progressed mystics and spiritualists, unsatisfied with the theories and explanations of spiritualism, started by its votaries, and finding that they were far from covering the whole ground of the wide range of phenomena, formed at New York, America, an association which is now widely known as the Theosophical Society. And now, having explained what is Theosophy, we will, in a separate article, explain what is the nature of our society, which is also called the Universal Brotherhood of Humanity. 3. The Royal Masonic Cyclopedia of History. Rites, Symbolism, and Biography. Edited by Kenneth R. H. Mackenzie 9, Cryptonymus, Honorable Member of the Canongate Kilwinning Lodge, No. 2. Scotland, New York, J. W. Boughton 706 Broadway. 1877. What are the Theosophists? Are they what they claim to be, students of natural law, of ancient and modern philosophy, and even of exact science? Are they deists, atheists, socialists, materialists, or idealists, or are they but a schism of modern spiritualism, mere visionaries? Are they entitled to any consideration, as capable of discussing philosophy and promoting real science, or should they be treated with the compassionate toleration which one gives to harmless enthusiasts? The Theosophical Society has been variously charged with a belief in miracles, and miracle working, with a secret political object like the Carbonari, with being spies of an autocratic czar, with preaching socialistic and nihilistic doctrines, and Mirabilt client, with having a covert understanding with the French Jesuits, to disrupt modern spiritualism for a pecuniary consideration. With equal violence they have been denounced as dreamers, by the American positivists, as fetish worshippers, by some of the New York press, as revivalists of moldy superstitions, by the spiritualists, as infidel emissaries of Satan, by the Christian Church. As the very types of Gobmush, by Professor W. B. Carpenter, FRS, and, finally, and most absurdly, some Hindu opponents, with a view to lessening their influence, have flatly charged them with the employment of demons to perform certain phenomena. Out of all this pother of opinions, one fact stands conspicuous: the society, its members, and their views, are deemed of enough importance to be discussed and denounced. Men slander only those whom they hate or fear. But, if the society has had its enemies and traducers, it has also had its friends and advocates. For every word of censure, there has been a word of praise. Beginning with a party of about a dozen earnest men and women, a month later its members had so increased as to necessitate the hiring of a public hall for its meetings. Within 2 years, it had working branches in European countries. Still later, it found itself in alliance with the Indian Arya Samaj, headed by the learned Pandit Dayanand Saraswati Swami, and the Ceylonese Buddhists, under the erudite H. Sumangala, High Priest of Adams Peak and President of the Vidyadaya College, Colombo. He who would seriously attempt to fathom the psychological sciences, must come to the sacred land of ancient Aryavarta. None is older than she in esoteric wisdom and civilization, however fallen may be her poor shadow modern India. Holding this country, as we do, for the fruitful hotbed whence proceeded all subsequent philosophical systems, to this source of all psychology and philosophy a portion of our society has come to learn its ancient wisdom, and ask for the impartation of its weird secrets. Philology has made too much progress to require at this late day a demonstration of this fact of the primogenitive nationality of Aryavart. The unproved and prejudiced hypothesis of modern chronology is not worthy of a moment's thought, and it will vanish in time like so many other unproved hypotheses. The line of philosophical heredity, from Kapila through Epicurus to James Mill, from Patanjali through Plotinus to Jacob Boehme, can be traced like the course of a river through a landscape. One of the objects of the Society's organization was to examine the two transcendent views of the spiritualists in regard to the powers of disembodied spirits, and, having told them what, in our opinion at least, a portion of their phenomena are not, it will become incumbent upon us now to show what they are. So apparent is it that it is in the East, and especially in India, that the key to the alleged supernatural phenomena of the spiritualists must be sought, that it has recently been conceded in the Allahabad Pioneer, August 11, 1879, an Anglo-Indian daily journal which has not the reputation of saying what it does not mean. Blaming the men of science who, intent upon physical discovery, for some generations have been too prone to neglect superphysical investigation, it mentions the new wave of doubt, spiritualism, which has latterly disturbed this conviction. To a large number of persons including many of high culture and intelligence, it adds, the supernatural has again asserted itself as a fit subject of inquiry and research. And there are plausible hypotheses in favor of the idea that among the sages of the East, there may be found in a higher degree than among the more modernized inhabitants of the West traces of those personal peculiarities, whatever they may be, which are required as a condition precedent to the occurrence of supernatural phenomena. And then, unaware that the cause he pleads is one of the chief aims and objects of our society, the editorial writer remarks that it is the only direction in which, it seems to us, the Theosophists in India might possibly be useful. The leading members of the Theosophical Society in India are known to be very advanced students of occult phenomena, already, and we cannot but hope that their professions of interest in Oriental philosophy may cover a deserved intention of carrying out explorations of the kind we indicate. While, as observed, one of our objects, it yet is but one of many, the most important of which is to revive the work of Ammonius Saccas, and make various nations remember that they are the children of one mother. As to the transcendental side of the ancient Theosophy, it is also high time that the Theosophical Society should explain with how much, then, of this nature-searching, God-seeking science of the ancient Aryan and Greek mystics, and of the powers of modern spiritual mediumship, Does the society agree? Our answer is, with it all. But if asked what it believes in, the reply will be, as a body nothing. The society, as a body, has no creed, as creeds are but the shells around spiritual knowledge, and Theosophy in its fruition is spiritual knowledge itself, the very essence of philosophical and theistic inquiry. Visible representative of universal Theosophy, it can be no more sectarian than a geographical society, which represents universal geographical exploration without caring whether the explorers be of one creed or another. The religion of the society is an algebraical equation, in which so long as the sign equals of equality is not omitted, each member is allowed to substitute quantity a sophison, which better accord with climatic and other exigencies of his native land, with the idiosyncrasies of his people, or even with his own. Having no accepted creed, our society is very ready to give and take, to learn and teach, by practical experimentation, as opposed to mere passive and credulous acceptance of enforced dogma. It is willing to accept every result claimed by any of the foregoing schools or systems, that can be logically and experimentally demonstrated. Conversely, it can take nothing on mere faith, no matter by whom the demand may be made. But, when we come to consider ourselves individually, it is quite another thing. The society's members represent the most varied nationalities and races, and were born and educated in the most dissimilar creeds and social conditions. Some of them believe in one thing, others in another. Some incline towards the ancient magic, or secret wisdom that was taught in the sanctuaries, which was the very opposite of supernaturalism or diabolism, others in modern spiritualism, or intercourse with the spirits of the dead, still others in mesmerism or animal magnetism, or only an occult dynamic force in nature. A certain number have scarcely yet acquired any definite belief, but are in a state of attentive expectancy, and there are even those who call themselves materialists, in a certain sense. Of atheists and bigoted sectarians of any religion, there are none in the society, for the very fact of a man's joining it proves that he is in search of the final truth as to the ultimate essence of things. If there be such a thing as a speculative atheist, which philosophers may deny, he would have to reject both cause and effect, whether in this world of matter, or in that of spirit. There may be members who, like the poet Shelley, have let their imagination soar from cause to prior cause ad infinitum, as each in its turn became logically transformed into a result necessitating a prior cause, until they have thinned the eternal into a mere mist. But even they are not atheist in the speculative sense, whether they identify the material forces of the universe with the functions with which the theists endow their God, or otherwise, for once that they cannot free themselves from the conception of the abstract ideal of power, cause, necessity, and effect, they can be considered as atheists only in respect to a personal God, and not to the universal soul of the pantheist. On the other hand, the bigoted sectarian, fenced in, as he is, with a creed upon every paling of which is written the warning "no thoroughfare," can neither come out of his enclosure to join the Seven Theosophical Society, nor, if he could, has it room for one whose very religion forbids examination. The very root idea of the society is free and fearless investigation. As a body, the Theosophical Society holds that all original thinkers and investigators of the hidden side of nature, whether materialists, those who find in matter the promise and potency of all terrestrial life, or spiritualists, that is, those who discover in spirit the source of all energy and of matter as well, were and are, properly, Theosophists. For to be one need not necessarily recognize the existence of any special God or a deity. One need but worship the spirit of living nature, and try to identify oneself with it. To revere that presence, the invisible cause, which is yet ever manifesting itself in its incessant results, the intangible, omnipotent, and omnipresent Proteus, indivisible in its essence, and eluding form, yet appearing under all and every form, who is here and there, and everywhere, and nowhere, is all, and nothing, ubiquitous yet one. The essence filling, binding, bounding, containing everything, contained in all. It will, we think, be seen now, that whether classed as theists, pantheists, or atheists, such men are near kinsmen to the rest. Be what he may, once that a student abandons the old and trodden highway of routine, and enters upon the solitary path of independent thought Godward, he is a theosophist, an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problems. With every man that is earnestly searching in his own way after a knowledge of the divine principle, of man's relations to it, and nature's manifestations of it, Theosophy is allied. It is likewise the ally of honest science, as distinguished from much that passes for exact, physical science, so long as the latter does not poach on the domains of psychology and metaphysics. And it is also the ally of every honest religion, to wit, a religion willing to be judged by the same tests as it applies to the others. Those books, which contain the most self-evident truth, are to it inspired, not revealed. But all books it regards, on account of the human element contained in them, as inferior to the book of nature. To read which and comprehend it correctly, the innate powers of the soul must be highly developed. Ideal laws can be perceived by the intuitive faculty alone, they are beyond the domain of argument and dialectics, and no one can understand or rightly appreciate them through the explanations of another mind, even though this mind be claiming a direct revelation. And, as this society, which allows the widest sweep in the realms of the pure ideal, is no less firm in the sphere of facts, its deference to modern science and its just representatives is sincere. Despite all their lack of a higher spiritual intuition, the world's debt to the representatives of modern physical science is immense, hence, the Society endorses heartily the noble and indignant protest of that gifted and eloquent preacher, the Rev. O.B. Frothingham, against those who try to undervalue the services of our great naturalists. Talk of sciences being irreligious, atheistic, he exclaimed in a recent lecture, delivered at New York, science is creating a new idea of God. It is due to science that we have any conception at all of a living God. If we do not become atheists one of these days under the maddening effect of Protestantism, it will be due to science, because it is disabusing us of hideous illusions that tease and embarrass us, and putting us in the way of knowing how to reason about the things we see. And it is also due to the unremitting labors of such Orientalists as Sir W. Jones, Max Muller, Bernard Colebrook, Hogg.St. Hilaire, and so many others, that the Society, as a body, feels equal respect and veneration for Vedic, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, and other old religions of the world, and a like brotherly feeling toward its Hindu, Sinhalese, Parsi, Jain, Hebrew, and Christian members as individual students of self, of nature, and of the divine in nature. Born in the United States of America, the Society was constituted on the model of its motherland. The latter, omitting the name of God from its constitution lest it should afford a pretext one day to make a state religion, gives absolute equality to all religions in its laws. A support and each is in turn protected by the state. The Society, modeled upon this constitution, may fairly be termed a republic of conscience. We have now, we think, made clear why our members, as individuals, are free to stay outside or inside any creed they please, provided they do not pretend that none but themselves shall enjoy the privilege of conscience, and try to force their opinions upon the others. In this respect the rules of the Society are very strict. It tries to act upon the wisdom of the old Buddhistic axiom, honor thine own faith, and do not slander that of others, echoed back in our present century in the Declaration of Principles of Brahmo Samaj. Which so nobly states that, no sect shall be vilified, ridiculed, or hated. In Section 6 of the Revised Rules of the Theosophical Society, recently adopted in General Council, at Bombay, is this mandate: it is not lawful for any officer of the parent society to express, by word or act, any hostility to, or preference for, any one section, sectarian division, or group within the society, more than another. All must be regarded and treated as equally the objects of the society's solicitude and exertions. All have an equal right to have the essential features of their religious belief laid before the tribunal of an impartial world. In their individual capacity, members may, when attacked, occasionally break this rule, but, nevertheless, as officers they are restrained, and the rule is strictly enforced during the meetings. For, above all human sects stands Theosophy in its abstract sense, Theosophy which is too wide for any of them to contain but which easily contains them. In conclusion, we may state that, broader and far more universal in its views than any existing mere scientific society, it has plus science its belief in every possibility, and determined will to penetrate into those unknown spiritual regions which exact science pretends that its votaries have no business to explore. And, it has one quality more than any religion in that it makes no difference between Gentile, Jew, or Christian. It is in this spirit that the society has been established upon the footing of a universal brotherhood. Unconcerned about politics, hostile to the insane dreams of socialism and of communism, which it abhors as both are but disguised conspiracies of brutal force and sluggishness against honest Iabur, the society cares but little about the outward human management of the material world. The whole of its aspirations are directed towards the occult truths of the visible and invisible worlds. Whether the physical man be under the rule of an empire or a republic, concerns only the man of matter. His body may be enslaved, as to his soul, he has the right to give to his rulers the proud answer of Socrates to his judges. They have no sway over the inner man. Such, then, is the Theosophical Society, and such its principles, its multifarious aims, and its objects. Need we wonder at the past misconceptions of the general public, and the easy hold the enemy has been able to find to lower it in the public estimation? The true student has ever been a recluse, a man of silence and meditation. With the busy world his habits and tastes are so little in common that, while he is studying, his enemies and slanderers have undisturbed opportunities. But time cures all and lies are but ephemera. Truth alone is eternal. About a few of the fellows of the society who have made great scientific discoveries, and some others to whom the psychologist and the biologist are indebted for the new light thrown upon the darker problems of the inner man, we will speak later on. Our object now was but to prove to the reader that Theosophy is neither a newfangled doctrine, a political cabal, nor one of those societies of enthusiasts which are born today but to die tomorrow. That not all of its members can think alike, is proved by the society having organized into two great divisions, the Eastern and the Western, and the latter being divided into numerous sections, according to races and religious views. One man's thought, infinitely various as are its manifestations, is not all-embracing. Denied ubiquity, it must necessarily speculate but in one direction, and once transcending the boundaries of exact human knowledge, it has to err and wander, for the ramifications of the one central and absolute truth are infinite. Hence, we occasionally find even the greater philosophers losing themselves in the labyrinths of speculations, thereby provoking the criticism of posterity. But as all work for one and the same object, namely, the disenthrallment of human thought, the elimination of superstitions, and the discovery of truth, all are equally welcome. The attainment of these objects, all agree, can best be secured by convincing the reason and warming the enthusiasm of the generation of fresh young minds, that are just ripening into maturity, and making ready to take the place of their prejudiced and conservative fathers. And, as each the great ones as well as small have trodden the royal road to knowledge, we listen to all, and take both small and great into our fellowship. For no honest searcher comes back empty-handed, and even he who has enjoyed the least share of popular favor can lay at least his mite upon the one altar of truth. Lucifer, November, 1888. Is Theosophy a religion? Religion is the best armor that man can have, but it is the worst cloak. Bunyan. It is no exaggeration to say that there never was during the present century, at any rate a movement, social or religious, so terribly, nay, so absurdly misunderstood, or more blundered. About then Theosophy, whether regarded theoretically as a code of ethics, or practically, in its objective expression, i.e., the society known by that name. Year after year, and day after day had our officers and members to interrupt people speaking of the Theosophical movement by putting in more or less emphatic protests against Theosophy being referred to as a religion, and the Theosophical Society as a kind of church or religious body. Still worse, it is as often spoken of as a new sect. Is it a stubborn prejudice, an error, or both? The latter, most likely. The most narrow-minded and even notoriously unfair people are still in need of a plausible pretext, of a peg on which to hang their little uncharitable remarks and innocently uttered slanders. And what peg is more solid for that purpose, more convenient than an ism or a section? The great majority would be very sorry to be disabused and finally forced to accept the fact that Theosophy is neither. The name suits them, and they pretend to be unaware of its falseness. But there are others, also, many more or less friendly people, who labor sincerely under the same delusion. To these, we say, surely the world has been hitherto sufficiently cursed with the intellectual extinguishers known as dogmatic creeds, without having inflicted upon it a new form of faith. Too many already wear their faith, truly, as Shakespeare puts it, but as the fashion of his hat, ever changing with the next block. Moreover, the very raison d'etre of the Theosophical Society was, from its beginning, to utter a loud protest and lead an open warfare against dogma or any belief based upon blind faith. It may sound odd and paradoxical, but it is true to say that, hitherto, the most apt workers in practical Theosophy, its most devoted members were those recruited from the ranks of agnostics and even of materialists. No genuine, no sincere searcher after truth can ever be found among the blind believers in the divine word, let the latter be claimed to come from Allah, Brahma, or Jehovah, or their respective Quran, Purana, and Bible. For, faith is not reason's labor, but repose. He who believes his own religion on faith, will regard that of every other man as a lie, and hate it on that same faith. Moreover, unless it fetters reason and entirely blinds our perceptions of anything outside our own particular faith, the latter is no faith at all, but a temporary belief, the delusion we labor under, at some particular time of life. Moreover, faith without principles is but a flattering phrase for willful positiveness or fanatical bodily sensations, in Coleridge's clever definition. What, then, is Theosophy, and how may it be defined in its latest presentation in this closing portion of the 6th century? Theosophy, we say, is not a religion. Yet there are, as everyone knows, certain beliefs, philosophical, religious and scientific, which have become so closely associated in recent years with the word Theosophy that they have come to be taken by the general public for Theosophy itself. Moreover, we shall be told these beliefs have been put forward, explained and defended by those very founders who have declared that Theosophy is not a religion. What is then the explanation of this apparent contradiction? How can a certain body of beliefs and teachings, an elaborate doctrine, in fact, be labeled Theosophy and be tacitly accepted as theosophical by 9/10 of the members of the TS, if Theosophy is not a religion? We are asked. To explain this is the purpose of the present protest. It is perhaps necessary, first of all, to say, that the assertion that Theosophy is not a religion, by no means excludes the fact that Theosophy is religion itself. A religion in the true and only correct sense, is a bond uniting men together, not a particular set of dogmas and beliefs. Now a religion, per re, in its widest meaning is that which binds not only all men, but also all beings and all things in the entire universe into a grand whole. This is our theosophical definition of religion, but the same definition changes again with every creed and country, and no two Christians even regard it alike. We find this in more than one eminent author. Thus Carlyle defined the Protestant religion in his day, with a remarkable prophetic eye to this ever-growing feeling in our present day, as, for the most part a wise, prudential philology, grounded on mere calculation, a matter, as all others now are, of expediency and utility, whereby some smaller quantum of earthly enjoyment may be exchanged for a far larger quantum of celestial enjoyment. Thus religion, too, is profit, a working for wages, not reverence, but vulgar hope and fear. In her turn Mrs. Stowe, whether consciously or otherwise, seemed to have had Roman Catholicism rather than Protestantism in her mind, when saying of her heroine that, religion she looked upon in the light of a ticket, with the correct number of indulgences bought and paid for, which, being once purchased and snugly laid away in a pocket book, is to be produced at the celestial gate, and thus secure admission to heaven. But to Theosophists, the genuine Theosophists are here meant, who accept no mediation by proxy, no salvation through innocent bloodshed, nor would they think of working for wages in the one universal religion, the only definition they could subscribe to and accept in full isone given by Miller. How truly and theosophically he describes it, by showing that true religion is always mild, propitious, and humble, plays not the tyrant, plants no faith in blood, nor bears destruction on her chariot wheels, but stoops to polish, succor and redress, and builds her grandeur on the public good. The above is a correct definition of what true theosophy is, or ought to be. Among creeds Buddhism alone is such a true heart-binding and men-binding philosophy, because it is not a dogmatic religion. In this respect, as it is the duty and task of every genuine theosophist to accept and carry out these principles. Theosophy is religion, and the society its one universal church, the temple of Solomon's wisdom * in building which there was neither hammer. * whose 700 wives and 300 concubines, by the by, are merely the personations of man's attributes, feelings, passions and his various occult powers, the Kabbalistic numbers 7 and 3 showing it plainly. Solomon himself, moreover, being, simply, the emblem of Sol, the solar initiate or the Chrlst sun, is a variant of the Indian Vikartana, the sun, shorn of his beams by Viswakarma, his Hierophant initiator, who thus shears the Crestos candidate for initiation of his golden radiance and crowns him with a dark, blackened aureole, the crown of thorns. See the Secret Doctrine for full explanation. Solomon was never a living man. As described in Kings, his life and works are an allegory on the trials and glory of initiation. Nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was building, I Kings, 6, for this temple is made by no human hand, nor built in any locality on earth but, verily, is raised only in the inner sanctuary of man's heart wherein reigns alone the awakened soul. Thus Theosophy is not a religion, we say, but religion itself, the one bond of unity, which is so universal and all-embracing that no man, as no speck from gods and mortals down to animals, the blade of grass and atom can be outside of its light. Therefore, any organization or body of that name must necessarily be a universal brotherhood. Were it otherwise, Theosophy would be but a word added to hundreds other such words as high-sounding as they are pretentious and empty. Viewed as a philosophy, Theosophy in its practical work is the alembic of the medieval alchemist. It transmutes the apparently base metal of every ritualistic and dogmatic creed, Christianity included, into the gold of fact and truth, and thus truly produces a universal panacea for the ills of mankind. This is why, when applying for admission into Theosophical Society, no one is asked what religion he belongs to, nor what his deistic views may be. These views are his own personal property and have not to do with the society. Because Theosophy can be practiced by Christian or heathen, Jew or Gentile, by agnostic or materialist, or even an atheist, provided that none of these is a bigoted fanatic, who refuses to recognize as his brother any man or woman outside his own special creed or belief. Count Leo N. Tolstoy does not believe in the Bible, the Church, or the divinity of Christ, and no Christian surpasses him in the practical bearing out of the principles alleged to have been preached on the Mount. And these principles are those of Theosophy, not because they were uttered by the Christian Christ, but because they are universal ethics, and were preached by Buddha and Confucius, Krishna, and all the great sages, thousands of years before the Sermon on the Mount was written. Hence, once that we wive up to such theosophy, it becomes a universal panacea indeed, for it heals the wounds inflicted by the gross asperities of the church-isms on the sensitive soul of every naturally religious man. How many of these, forcibly thrust out by the reactive impulse of disappointment from the narrow area of blind belief into the ranks of arid disbelief, have been brought back to hopeful aspiration by simply joining our brotherhood, yet, imperfect as it is. If, as an offset to this, we are reminded that several prominent members have left society disappointed in Theosophy as they had been in other associations, this cannot dismay us in the least. For with a very, very few exceptions, in the early stage of the T.SS activities, when some left because they did not find mysticism practiced in the general body as they understood it, or because the leaders lacked spirituality, were untheosophical, hence, untrue to the rules, you see, the majority left because most of them were either half-hearted or too self-opinionated a church and infallible dogma in themselves. Some broke away, again under very shallow pretexts indeed, such, for instance, as because Christianity, to say churchianity, or sham Christianity, would be more just, was too roughly handled in our magazines, just as if other fanatical religions were ever treated any better or upheld. Thus, all those who left have done well to leave, and have never been regretted. Furthermore, there is this also to be added, the number of those who left can hardly be compared with the number of those who found everything they had hoped for in Theosophy. Its doctrines, if seriously studied, call forth, by stimulating one's reasoning powers and awakening the inner in the animal man, every hitherto dormant power for good in us, and also the perception of the true and the real, as opposed to the false and the unreal. Tearing off with no uncertain hand the thick veil of dead letter with which every old religious scriptures were cloaked, scientific Theosophy, learned in the cunning symbolism of the ages, reveals to the scoffer at old wisdom the origin of the world's faiths and sciences. It opens new vistas beyond the old horizons of crystallized, motionless and despotic faiths, and turning blind belief into a reasoned knowledge founded on mathematical laws, the only exact science, it demonstrates to him under profounder and more philosophical aspects the existence of that which, repelled by the grossness of its dead letter form, he had long since abandoned as a nursery tale. It gives a clear and well-defined object, an ideal to live for, to every sincere man or woman belonging to whatever station in society and of whatever culture and degree of intellect. Practical Theosophy is not one science, but embraces every science in life, moral and physical. It may, in short, be justly regarded as the universal coach, a tutor of worldwide knowledge and experience, and of an erudition which not only assists and guides his pupils toward a successful examination for every scientific or moral service in earthly life, but fits them for the lives to come, if those pupils will only study the universe and its mysteries within themselves, instead of studying them through the spectacles of orthodox science and religions. And let no reader misunderstand these statements. Itis Theosophy per se, not any individual member of the society or even theosophist, on whose behalf such a universal omniscience is claimed. The two Theosophy and the Theosophical Society as a vessel and the oucipodrida it contains, must not be confounded. Onis datus an ideal, divine wisdom, perfection itself, the other a poor, imperfect thing, trying to run under, if not within, its shadow on earth. No man is perfect. Why, then, should any member of the TS be expected to be a paragon of every human virtue? And why should the whole organization be criticized and blamed for the faults, whether real or imaginary, of some of its fellows, or even its leaders? Never was the society, as a concrete body, free from blame or sin errare huma. None est nor were any of its members. Hence, it is rather those members most of whom will not be led by Theosophy, that ought to be blamed. Theosophy is the soul of its society, the latter the gross and imperfect body of the former. Hence, those modern Solomons who will sit in the judgment seat and talk of that they know nothing about, are invited before they slander Theosophy or any Theosophists to first get acquainted with both, instead of ignorantly calling one a farrago of insane beliefs and the other a sect of impostors and lunatics. Regardless of this, Theosophy is spoken of by friends and foes as a religion when not a sect. Let us see how the special beliefs which have become associated with the word have come to stand in that position, and how it is that they have so good a right to it that none of the leaders of the society have ever thought of disavowing their doctrines. We have said that we believed in the absolute unity of nature. Unity implies the possibility for a unit on one plane to come into contact with another unit and or from another plane. We believe in it. The just published secret doctrine will show what were the ideas of all antiquity with regard to the primeval instructors of primitive man and his three earlier races. The genesis of that wisdom religion, in which all Theosophists believe, dates from that period. So-called occultism, or rather esoteric science, has to be traced in its origin to those beings who, led by karma, have incarnate in our humanity, and thus struck the keynote of that secret science which countless generations of subsequent adepts have expanded since then in every age, while they checked its doctrines by personal observation and experience. The bulk of this knowledge which no man is able to possess in its fullness constitutes that which we now call Theosophy or divine knowledge. Beings from other and higher worlds may have it entire, we can have it only approximately. Thus, unity of everything in the universe implies and justifies our belief in the existence of a knowledge at once scientific, philosophical, and religious, showing the necessity and actuality of the connection of man and all things in the universe with each other, which knowledge, therefore, becomes essentially religion, and must be called, in its integrity and universality, by the distinctive name of wisdom religion. It is from this wisdom religion that all the various individual religions, erroneously so called, have sprung, forming in their turn offshoots and branches, and also all the minor creeds, based upon and always originated through some personal experience in psychology. Every such religion, or religious offshoot, be it considered orthodox or heretical, wise or foolish, started originally as a clear and unadulterated stream from the mother source. The fact that each became in time polluted with purely human speculations and even inventions, due to interested motives, does not prevent any from having been pure in its early beginnings. There are those creeds, we shall not call them religions, which have now been overlaid with the human element out of all recognition, others just showing signs of early decay, not one that escaped the hand of time. But each and all are of divine, because natural and true origin, as deism, Brahmanism, Buddhism as much as Christianity. It is the dogmas and human element in the latter which led directly to modern spiritualism. Of course, there will be an outcry from both sides, if we say that modern spiritualism per se, cleansed of the unhealthy speculations which were based on the dicta of two little girls and their very unreliable spirits, is, nevertheless, far more true and philosophical than any church dogma. Carnalist spiritualism is now reaping its karma. Its primitive innovators, the said two little girls from Rochester, the Mecca of modern spiritualism, have grown up and turned into old women since the first raps produced by them have opened wide ajar the gates between this and the other world. It is on their innocent testimony thought the laborasi scheme of a sidereal summerland, with its active astral population of spirits, ever on the wing between their silent land and our very loud-mouthed gossiping earth, has been started and worked out. And now the two female Mohammeds of modern spiritualism have turned self-apostates and play false to the philosophy they have created, and have gone over to the enemy. They expose and denounce practical spiritualism as the humbug oft ages. Spiritualists, save a handful of fair exceptions, have rejoiced and sided with our enemies and slanderers, when these, who had never been Theosophists, played us false and showed the cloven foot, denouncing the founders of the Theosophical Society as frauds and impostors. Shall the Theosophists laugh in their turn now that the original revealers of spiritualism have become its teebalers? Never. For the phenomena of spiritualism are facts, and the treachery of the fox girls only makes us feel new pity for all mediums, and confirms, before the whole world, our constant declaration that no medium can be relied upon. No true Theosophist will ever laugh, or far less rejoice, at the discomfiture even of an opponent. The reason for it is simple, because we know that beings from other, higher worlds do confabulate with some elect mortals now as ever, though now far more rarely than in the days of old, as mankind becomes with every civilized generation worse in every respect. Theosophy owing, in truth, to the levy in arms of all the spiritualists of Europe and America at the first words uttered against the idea that every communicating intelligence is necessarily the spirit of some ex-mortal from this earth has not said its last word about spiritualism and spirits. It may one day. Meanwhile, an humble servant of Theosophy, the editor, declares once more her belief in beings, grander, wiser, nobler than any persona God, who are beyond any spirits of the dead, saints, or winged angels, who, nevertheless, do condescend inal and yet occasionally overshadow rare sensitives often entirely unconnected with church, spiritualism or even theosophy. And believing in high and holy spiritual beings, she must also believe in the existence of their opposites lower spirits, good, bad and indifferent. Therefore does she believe in spiritualism and its phenomena, some of which are so repugnant to her. This, as a casual remark and a digression, just to show that Theosophy includes spiritualism as it should be, not as it is among its sciences, based on knowledge and the experience of countless ages. There is not a religion worthy of the name which has been started otherwise than in consequence of such visits from beings on the higher planes. Thus were born all prehistoric, as well as all the historic religions, Mazdaism and Brahmanism, Buddhism and Christianity, Judaism, Gnosticism and Mahomedanism, in short every more or less successful ism. All are true at the bottom, and all are false on their surface. The revealer, the artist who impressed a portion of the truth on the brain of the seer, was in every instance a true artist, who gave out genuine truths, but the instrument proved also, in every instance, to be only a man. Invite Rubinstein and ask him to play a sonata of Beethoven on a piano left to self-tuning, one half of the keys of which are in chronic paralysis, while the wires hang loose, then see wet her, the genius of the artist notwithstanding, you will be able to recognize the sonata. The moral of the fabula is that a man let him be the greatest of mediums or natural seers is but a man, and man left to his own devices and speculations must be out of tune with absolute truth. While even picking up some of its crumbs. For man is but a fallen angel, a god within, but having an animal brain in his head, more subject to cold and wine fumes while in company with other men on earth, than to the faultless reception of divine revelations. Hence the multicolored dogmas of the churches. Hence also the 1,001 philosophies so called, some contradictory, theosophical theories included, and the variegated sciences and schemes, spiritual, mental, Christian and secular, sectarianism and bigotry, and especially the personal vanity and opinionatedness of almost every innovator since the medieval ages. These have all darkened and hidden the very existence of truth, the common root of all. Will our critics imagine that we exclude theosophical teachings from this nomenclature? Not at all. And though the esoteric doctrines which our society has been and is expounding, are not mental or spiritual impressions from some unknown, from above, but the fruit of teachings given to us by living men, still, except that which was dictated and written out by those masters of wisdom themselves, these doctrines may be in many cases as incomplete and faulty as any of our foes would desire it. The secret doctrine, a work which gives out all that can be given out during this century, is an attempt to lay bare in pari the common foundation and inheritance of all great and small religious and philosophical schemes. It was found indispensable to tear away all this mass of concreted misconceptions and prejudice which now hides the parent trunk of a. all the great world religions, b. of the smaller sects, and c. of theosophy as it stands now. However veiled the great truth, by ourselves and our limited knowledge. The crust of error is thick, laid on by whatever hand, and because we personally have tried to remove some of it, the effort became the standing reproach against all theosophical writers and even the society. Few among our friends and readers have failed to characterize our attempt to expose error in the Theosophist and Lucifer as very uncharitable attacks on Christianity, untheosophical assaults, etc., etc. Yet these are necessary, nay, indispensable, if we wish to plow up at least approximate truths. We have to lay things bare, and are ready to suffer for it as usual. It is vain to promise to give truth, and then leave it mingled with error out of mere faint-heartedness. That the result of such policy could only muddy the stream of facts is shown plainly. After 12 years of incessant labor and struggle with enemies from the four quarters of the globe, notwithstanding our four theosophical monthly journals, the Theosophist, Path, Lucifer, and the French Lotus, are wish-washy, tame protests in them, our timid declarations, our masterly policy of inactivity, and playing at hide-and-seek in the shadow of dreary metaphysics, have only led to Theosophy being seriously regarded as a religious sect. For the 100th time we are told what good is Theosophy doing, and see what good the churches are doing. Nevertheless, it is an averred fact that mankind is not a whit better in morality, and in some respects 10 times worse now, than it ever was in the days of paganism. Moreover, for the last half-century, from that period when free thought and science got the best of the churches, Christianity is yearly losing far more adherents among the cultured classes than it gains proselytes in the lower strata, the scum of heathendom. On the other hand, Theosophy has brought back from materialism and blank despair to belief, based on logic and evidence, in man's divine self, and the immortality of the latter, more than one of those whom the Church has lost through dogma, exaction of faith and tyranny. And, if it is proven that Theosophy saves one man only in 1,000 of those the Church has lost, is not the former a far higher factor for good than all the missionaries put together? Theosophy, as repeatedly declared in print and viva voce by its members and officers, proceeds on diametrically opposite lines to those which are trodden by the Church, and Theosophy rejects the methods of science, since her inductive methods can only lead to crass materialism. Yet, de facto, Theosophy claims to be both religion and science, for Theosophy is the essence of both. It is for the sake and love of the two divine abstractions theosophical religion and science, that its society has become the volunteer scavenger of both orthodox religion and modern science, as also the relentless nemesis of those who have degraded the two noble truths to their own ends and purposes, and then divorced each violently from the other, though the two are and must be one. To prove this is also one of our objects in the present paper. The modern materialist insists on an impassable chasm between the two, pointing out that the conflict between religion and science has ended in the triumph of the latter and the defeat of the first. The modern theosophist refuses to see, on the contrary, any such chasm at all. If it is claimed by both church and science that each of them pursues the truth and nothing but the truth, then either one of them is mistaken, and accepts falsehood for truth, or both. Any other impediment to their reconciliation must be set down as purely fictitious. Truth is one, even if sought for or pursued at two different ends. Therefore, Theosophy claims to reconcile the two foes. It premises by saying that the true spiritual and primitive Christian religion is, as much as the other great and still older philosophies that preceded it, the light of truth, the life and the light of men. But so is the true light of science. Therefore, darkened as the former is now by dogmas examined through glasses smoked with the superstitions artificially produced by the churches, this light can hardly penetrate and meet its sister ray in a science, equally as cobwebbed by paradoxes and the materialistic sophistries of the age. The teachings of the two are incompatible, and cannot agree so long as both religious philosophy and the science of physical and external, in philosophy, false, nature, insist upon the infallibility of their respective will-o'-the-wisps. The two lights, having their beams of equal length in the matter of false deductions, can but tinguish each other and produce still worse darkness. Yet, they can be reconciled on the condition that both shall clean their houses, one from the human dross of the ages, the other from the hideous excrescence of modern materialism and atheism. And as both decline, the most meritorious and best thing to do is precisely what Theosophy alone can and will do, i.e., point out to the innocents caught by the glue of the two waylayers verily two dragons of old, one devouring the intellects, the other the souls of men, that their supposed chasm is but an optical delusion, that, far from being one, it is but an immense garbage mound respectively erected by the two foes, as a fortification against mutual attacks. Thus, if Theosophy does no more than point out and seriously draw the attention of the world to the fact that the supposed disagreement between religion and science is conditioned, on the one hand by the intelligent materialists rightly kicking against absurd human dogmas, and on the other by blind fanatics and interested churchmen, who, instead of defending the souls of mankind, fight simply tooth and nail for their personal bread and butter and authority, why, even then, Theosophy will prove itself the savior of mankind. And now we have shown, it is hoped, what real Theosophy is, and what are its adherents. One is divine science and a code of ethics so sublime that no Theosophist is capable of doing it justice, the others weak but sincere men. Why, then, should Theosophy ever be judged by the personal shortcomings of any leader or member of our 150 branches? One may work for it to the best of his ability, yet never raise himself to the height of his call and aspiration. This is his or her misfortune, never the fault of Theosophy, or even of the body at large. Its founders claim no other merit than that of having set the first theosophical wheel rolling. If judged at all, they must be judged by the work they have done, not by what friends may think or enemies say of them. There is no room for personalities in a work like ours, and all must be ready, as the founders are, if needs be, for the car of Jagannath to crush them individually for the pood of all. It is only in the days of the dim future, when death will have laid his cold hand on the luckless founders and stopped thereby their activity, that their respective merits and demerits, their good and bad acts and deeds, and their theosophical work will have to be weighed on the balance of posterity. Then only, after the two scales with their contrasted loads have been brought to an equipoise, and the character of the net result left over has become evident to all in its full and intrinsic value, then only shall the nature of the verdict. 34 basic questions past be determined with anything like justice. At present, except in India, those results are too scattered over the face of the earth, too much limited to a handful of individuals to be easily judged. Now, these results can hardly be perceived, much less heard of amid the din and clamor made by our teeming enemies, and their ready imitators the indifferent. Yet however small, if once proved good, even now every man who has at heart the moral progress of humanity, owes his thankfulness to Theosophy for those results. And as Theosophy was revived and brought before the world, via its unworthy servants, the founders, if their work was useful, it alone must be their vindicator, regardless of the present state of their balance in the petty cash accounts of karma, wherein social respectabilities are entered up. Lucifer, November, 1887. Let every man prove his own work. Uke is the title of a letter received by the editors of Lucifer. It is of so serious a nature that it seems well to make it the subject of this month's editorial. Considering the truths uttered in its few lines, its importance, and the bearing it has upon the much obscured subject of Theosophy, and its visible agent or vehicle the society of that name, the letter is certainly worthy of the most considerate answer. Fiat justitia, ruat caelum. Justice will be done to both sides in the dispute, namely, Theosophists and the members of the Theosophical Society, one on the one hand, and the followers of the Divine Word, or Christos, and the so-called Christians, on the other. We reproduce the letter, to the editors of Lucifer. What a grand chance is now open in this country, to the exponents of a noble and advanced religion, if such this Theosophy be too, for proving its strength, righteousness, and verity to the Western world, by throwing a penetrating and illuminating ray of It's declared light upon the terribly harrowing and perplexing practical problems of our age. Surely one of the purest and least self-encrusted duties of man, is to alleviate the sufferings of his fellow man? From what one read, and from what I daily come into immediate contact with, I can hardly think it would be possible to overrate. In contemplation, the intense privation and agonizing suffering that is, I say it at this moment, being endured by a vast pro1. Not all the members of the Theosophical Society are Theosophists, nor are the members of the so-called Christian churches all Christians, by any means. True Theosophists, as true Christians, are very, very few, and there are practical Theosophists in the fold of Christianity, as there are practical Christians in the Theosophical Society, outside all ritualistic Christianity. Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father. Matthew 7:21. Believe not in me, but in the truths I utter. Buddha's aphorisms. 2. This Theosophy is not a religion, but rather the religion if one. So far, we prefer to call it a philosophy, 1, moreover, which contains every religion, as it is the essence and the foundation of all. Rule 3. Of the Theos. Body says, the society represents no particular religious creed, is entirely unsectarian, and includes professors of all faiths. Portion of our brothers and sisters, arising in a large measure from their not absolutely having the means for procuring the bare necessaries of existence. Surely a high and heaven-born religion, a religion professing to receive its advanced knowledge and light from those more learned in the science of life, should be able to tell us something of how to deal with such life, in its primitive condition of helpless submission to the surrounding circumstances of civilization. If one of our main duties is that of exercising disinterested love towards the brotherhood, surely those more learned ones, whether in the flesh, or out of it, can and will, if appealed to by the votaries, aid them in discovering ways and means for such an end, and in organizing some great fraternal scheme for dealing rightly with questions which are so appalling in their complexity, and which must and do press with such irresistible force upon all those who are earnest in their endeavors to carry out the will of Christ in a Christian land? L.F.F. October 25, 1887. This honest-spoken and sincere letter contains two statements, an implied accusation against Theosophy, i.e., the society of that name, and a virtual admission that Christianity or, again, rather its ritualistic and dogmatic religions deserve the same and even a sterner rebuke. For if Theosophy, represented by its professors, merits on external appearance the reproach that so far it has failed to transfer divine wisdom from the region of the metaphysical into that of practical work, Christianity, that is, merely professing Christians, churchmen and laymen, lie under a like accusation, evidently. Theosophy has, certainly, failed to discover infallible ways and means of bringing all its votaries to exercise disinterested love in their brotherhood. It has not yet been able to relieve suffering in mankind at large, but neither has Christianity. And not even the writer of the above letter, nor anyone else, can show sufficient excuse for the Christians in this respect. Thus the admission that those who are earnest in their endeavors to carry out the will of Christ in a Christian land need the help of those more learned, whether pagan adepts, in the flesh, or spirits, out of it is very suggestive. For it contains the defense and the raison d'etre of the Theosophical Society. Tacit though it is, once that it comes from the pen of a sincere Christian, one who longs to learn some practical means to relieve the sufferings of the starving multitudes, this admission becomes the greatest and most complete justification for the existence of the Theosophical Brotherhood, a full confession of the absolute necessity for such a body independent of, and untrammeled by, any enchaining dogmas, and it points out at the same time the signal failure of Christianity to accomplish the desired results. Truly said Coleridge that good works may exist without saving principles, therefore cannot contain in themselves the principles of salvation, but saving principles never did, never can exist without good works. Theosophists admit the definition, and disagree with the Christians only as to the nature of these saving principles. The Church, or churches, maintain that the only saving principle is belief in Jesus, or the carnalized Christ of the soul-killing dogma. Theosophy, undogmatic and unsectarian, answers, it is not so. The only saving principle dwells in man himself, and has never dwelt outside of his immortal divine self, i.e., it is the true Christos, as it is the true Buddha, the divine inward light which proceeds from the eternal unmanifesting unknown all. And this light can only be made known by its works, faith in it having to remain ever blind in all, save in the man himself who feels that light within his soul. Therefore, the tacit admission of the author of the above letter covers another point of great importance. The writer seems to have felt that which many, among those who strive to help the suffering, have felt and expressed. The creeds of the churches fail to supply the intellectual light, and the true wisdom which are needed to make the practical philanthropy carried out, by the true and earnest followers of Christ, a reality. The practical people either go on doing good unintelligently, and thus often do harm instead, or, appalled by the awful problem before them, and failing to find in their churches any clue, or a hope of solution, they retire from the battlefield and let themselves be drifted blindly by the current in which they happen to be born. Of late it has become the fashion for friends, as well as for foes, to reproach the Theosophical Society with doing no practical work, but losing itself in the clouds of metaphysics. Metaphysicians, we are told, by those who like to repeat stale arguments, have been learning their lesson for the last few thousand years, and it is now high time that they should begin to do some practical work. Agreed, but considering that the Christian churches count nearly 19 centuries of existence, and that the Theosophical Society and Brotherhood is a body hardly 12 years old, considering again that the Christian churches roll in fabulous wealth, and number their adherents by hundreds of millions, whereas the Theosophical Brotherhood is but a few thousand strong, and that it has no fund, or funds, at its disposal, but that 98% of its members are American Samoa poor and as uninfluential as the aristocracy of the Christian church is rich and powerful. Taking all this into consideration, there would be much to say if the Theosophists would only choose to press the matter upon the public notice. Meanwhile, as the bitterest critics of the leaders of the Theosophical Society are by no means only outsiders, but as there are members of that society who always find a pretext to be dissatisfied, we ask, can works of charity that will be known among men be accomplished without money? Certainly not. And yet, notwithstanding all this, none of its European members, except a few devoted officers in charge of societies, will do practical work, but some of them, those especially who have never lifted a finger to relieve suffering, and help their outside, poorer brothers, are those who talk the most loudly, and are the bitterest in their denunciations of the unspirituality and the unfitness of the leaders of Theosophy. By this they remove themselves into the outer ring of critics, like those spectators at the play who laugh at an actor passably representing Hamlet, while they themselves could not walk on the stage with a letter on a salver. While in India, comparatively poor Theosophists have opened gratuitous dispensaries for the sick, hospitals, schools, and everything they could think of, asking no returns from the poor, as the missionaries do, no abandonment of one's forefathers' religion, as a heavy price for favors received. Have the English Theosophists, as a rule, done a single thing for those suffering multitudes, whose pitiful cry rings throughout the whole heavens as a protest against the actual state of things in Christendom? We take this opportunity of saying, in reply to others as much as to our correspondent, that, up till now, the energies of the Society have been chiefly occupied in organizing, extending, and solidifying the Society itself, which has taxed its time, energies, and resources to such an extent as to leave it far less powerful for practical charity than we would have wished. But, even so, compared with the influence and the funds at the disposal of the Society, its work in practical charity, if less widely known, will certainly bear favorable comparison with that of professing Christians, with their enormous resources in money, workers, and opportunities of all kinds. It must not be forgotten that practical charity is not one of the declared objects of society. It goes without saying, and needs no declaration, that every member of the society must be practically philanthropic if he be a theosophist at all, and our declared work is, in reality, more important and more efficacious than work in the everyday plane which bears more evident and immediate fruit, for the direct effect of an appreciation of Theosophy is to make those charitable who were not so before. Theosophy creates the charity which afterwards, and of its own accord, makes itself manifest in works. Theosophy is correctly, though in this particular case, it is rather ironically termed a high, heaven-born religion. It is argued that since it professes to receive its advanced knowledge and light from those more learned in the science of life, the latter ought and must, if applied to by their votaries, the Theosophists, aid them in discovering ways and means, in organizing some great fraternal scheme, etc. The scheme was planned, and the rules and laws to guide such a practical brotherhood, have been given by those more learned in the science of practical daily, altruistic, life, I verily more learned in it than any other men since the days of Gautama Buddha and the Gnostic Essenes. The scheme dates back to the year when the Theosophical Society was founded. Let anyone read its wise and noble laws embodied to this day in the statutes of the fraternity, and judge for himself whether, if carried out rigorously and applied to practical life, the scheme would not have proved the most beneficent to mankind in general, and especially to our poorer brethren of the starving multitudes. Theosophy teaches the spirit of non-separateness, the evanescence and illusion of human creeds and dogma, hence, inculcates universal love and charity for all mankind without distinction of race, color, caste, or creed. Is it not therefore the fittest to alleviate the sufferings of mankind? No true Theosophist would refuse admission into a hospital or any charitable establishment, to any man, woman, or child, under the pretext that he is not a Theosophist, as a Roman Catholic would when dealing with a Protestant. And vice versa. No true Theosophist of the original rules would fail to put into practice the parable of the Good Samaritan, or proffer help only to enticeth unwary who he hopes, will become a pervert from his God and the gods of his forefathers. None would slander his brother, none let a needy man go unhelped, none offer fine talk instead of practical love and charity. Is it then the fault of Theosophy, any more than it is the fault of the Christ teachings? If the majority of the members of the Theosophical Society, often changing their philosophical and religious views upon entering our body, have yet remained practically the same as they were when professing lip Christianity. Our laws and rules are the same as given to us from the beginning. It is the general members of the society who have allowed them to become virtually obsolete. Those few who are ever ready to sacrifice their time and labor to work for the poor, and who do, unrecognized and unthanked for it, good work wherever they can, are often too poor themselves to put their larger schemes of charity into objective practical form, however willing they may be. The fault I find with the Theosophical Society, said one of the most eminent surgeons in London to one of the editors, quite recently, is that I cannot discover that any of its members really lead the Christ life. This seemed a very serious accusation from a man who is not only in the front rank of his profession and valued for his kindly nature, by his patients, and by society, and well known as a quiet doer of many good deeds. The only possible answer to be made was that the Christ life is undeniably the ideal of everyone worthy in any sense of the name of a Theosophist, and that if it is not lived it is because there are none strong enough to carry it out. Only a few days later the same complaint was put in a more graphic form by a celebrated lady artist. "You Theosophists don't do enough good for me," she said pithily. And in her case also there is the right to speak, given by the fact that she leads two lives, one, a butterfly existence in society, and the other a serious one, which makes little noise, but has much purpose. Those who regard life as a great vocation, like the two critics of the Theosophical movement whom we have just quoted, have a right to demand of such a movement more than mere words. They themselves endeavor very quietly to lead the Christ life, and they cannot understand a number of people uniting in the effort towards this life without practical results being apparent. Another critic of the same character who has the best possible right to criticize, being a thoroughly practical philanthropist and charitable to the last degree, has said of the Theosophists that their much talking and writing seems to resolve itself into mere intellectual luxury, productive of no direct good to the world. The point of difference between the Theosophists, when we use this term we mean, not members of the society, but people who are really using the organization as a method of learning more of a hetero-wisdom religion which exists as a vital and eternal fact behind all such efforts, and the practical philanthropists, religious or secular, is a very serious one, and the answer, that probably none of them are strong enough yet to lead the Christ life, is only a portion of the truth. The situation can be put very plainly, in so many words. The religious philanthropist holds a position of his own, which cannot in any way concern or affect the Theosophist. He does not do good merely for the sake of doing good, but also as a means towards his own salvation. This is the outcome of the selfish and personal side of man's nature, which has so colored and affected a grand religion that its devotees are little better than the idol worshippers who ask their deity of clay to bring them luck in business, and the payment of debts. The religious philanthropist who hopes to gain salvation by good works has simply, to quote a well-worn yet ever-fresh witticism, exchanged worldliness for otherworldliness. The secular philanthropist is really at heart a socialist, and nothing else. He hopes to make men happy and good by bettering their physical position. No serious student of human nature can believe in this theory for a moment. There is no doubt that it is a very agreeable one, because if it is accepted there is immediate, straightforward work to undertake. The poor ye have always with you. The causation which produced human nature itself produced poverty, misery, pain, degradation, at the same time that it produced wealth, and comfort, and joy and glory. Lifelong philanthropists, who have started on their work with a joyous youthful conviction that it is possible to do good, have, though never relaxing the habit of charity, confessed to the present writer that, as a matter of fact, misery cannot be relieved. It is a vital element in human nature, and is as necessary to some lives as pleasure is to others. It is a strange thing to observe how practical philanthropists will eventually, after long and bitter experience, arrive at a conclusion which, to an occultist, is from the first a working hypothesis. This is, that misery is notonly endurable, but agreeable to many who endure it. A noble woman, whose life has been given to the rescue of the lowest class of wretched girls, those who seem to be driven to vice by want, said, only a few days since, that with many of these outcasts, it is not possible to raise them to any apparently happier lot, and this she distinctly stated, and she can speak with authority, having spent her life literally among them, and studied them thoroughly, is not so much from any love of vice, but from love of that very state which the wealthy classes call misery. They prefer the savage life of a barefoot, half-clad creature, with no roof at night and no food by day, to any comforts which can be offered them. By comforts, we do not mean the workhouse or the reformatory, but the comforts of a quiet home, and we can give chapter and verse, so to speak, to show that this is the case, not merely with the children of outcasts, who might be supposed to have a savage heredity, but with the children of gentle, cultivated, and Christian people. Our great towns hide in their slums thousands of beings whose history would form an inexplicable enigma, a perfectly baffling moral picture, could they be written out clearly, so as to be intelligible. But they are only known to the devoted workers among the outcast classes, to whom they become a sad and terrible puzzle, not to be solved one, and therefore, better not discussed. Those who have no clue to the sciency of life are compelled to dismiss such difficulties in this manner, otherwise they would fall, crushed beneath the thought of them. The social question as it is called, the great deep waters of misery, the deadly apathy of those who have power and possessions, these things are hardly to be faced by a generous soul. Who has not reached to the great idea of evolution? And who has not guessed at the marvelous mystery of human development? The Theosophist is placed in a different position from any of these persons, because he has heard of the vast scope of life with which all mystic and occult writers and teachers deal, and he has been brought very near to the great mystery. Indeed, none, though they may have enrolled themselves as fellows of the society, can be called in any serious sense Theosophists, until they have begun to consciously taste in their own persons, this same mystery, which is, indeed, a law inexorable, by which man lifts himself by degrees from the state of a beast to the glory of a god. The rapidity with which this is done is different with every living soul, and the wretches who hug the primitive taskmaster, misery, choose to go slowly through a treadmill course which may give them innumerable lives of physical sensation, whether pleasant or painful, well beloved because tangible to the very lowest senses. The Theosophist who desires to enter upon occultism takes some of nature's privileges into his own hands, by that very wish, and soon discovers Thetex parenxcomato him with double quick rapidity. His business is then to recognize that he is under a to him new and swifter law of development, and to snatch at the lessons that come to him. But, in recognizing this, he also makes another discovery. He sees that it takes a very wise man to do good works without danger of doing incalculable harm. A highly developed adept in life may grasp the nettle, and by his great intuitive powers, know whom to relieve from pain and whom to leave in the mire that is their best teacher. The poor and wretched themselves will tell anyone who is able to win their confidence what disastrous mistakes are made by those who come from a different class and endeavor to help them. Kindness and gentle treatment will sometimes bring out the worst qualities of a man or woman who has led a fairly presentable life when kept down by pain and despair. May the Master of Mercy forgive us for saying such words of any human creatures, all of whom are a part of ourselves, according to the law of human brotherhood which no disowning of it can destroy. But the words are true. None of us know the darkness which lurks in the depths of our own natures until some strange and unfamiliar experience rouses the whole being into action. So with these others who seem more miserable than ourselves. As soon as he begins to understand what a friend and teacher pain can be, the Theosophist stands appalled before the mysterious problem of human life, and though he may long to do good works, equally dreads to do them wrongly until he has himself acquired greater power and knowledge. The ignorant doing of good works may be vitally injurious, as all but those who are blind in their love of benevolence are compelled to acknowledge. In this sense the answer made as to lack of Christ-like lives among Theosophists, that there are probably none strong enough to live such, is perfectly correct and covers the whole question. For it is not the spirit of self-sacrifice, or of devotion, or of desire to help that is lacking, but the strength to acquire knowledge and power and intuition, so that the deeds done shall really be worthy of the Buddha Christ's spirit. Therefore it is that Theosophists cannot pose as a body of philanthropists, though secretly they may adventure on the path of good works. They profess to be a body of learners merely, pledged to help each other and all the rest of humanity, so far as in them lies, to a better understanding of the mystery of life, and to a better knowledge of the peace which lies beyond it. But as it is an inexorable law, that the ground must be tilled if the harvest is to be reaped, so Theosophists are obliged to work in the world unceasingly, and very often in doing this to make serious mistakes, as do all workers who are not embodied redeemers. Their efforts may not come under the title of good works, and they may be condemned as a school of idle talkers, yet they are an outcome and fruition of this particular moment of time, when the ideas which they hold are greeted by the crowd with interest, and therefore their work is good, as the lotus flower is good when it opens in the midday sun. None know more keenly and definitely than they that good works are necessary, only these cannot be rightly accomplished without knowledge. Schemes for universal brotherhood, and the redemption of mankind, might be given out plentifully by the great adepts of life, and would be mere dead-letter utterances while individuals remain ignorant, and unable to grasp the great meaning of their teachers. To Theosophists we say, let us carry out the rules given us for our society before we ask for any further schemes or laws. To the public and our critics we say, try to understand the value of good works before you demand them of others, or enter upon them rashly yourselves. Yet it is an absolute fact that without good works the spirit of brotherhood would die in the world, and this can never be. Therefore is the doubly activity of learning gone doing most necessary. We have to do good, and we have to do it rightly, with knowledge. Asterisk 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 asterisk. It is well known that the first rule of the society is to carry out the object of forming the nucleus of a universal brotherhood. The practical working of this rule was explained by those who laid it down, to the following effect: he who does not practice altruism, he who is not prepared to share his last morsel with a weaker or poorer than himself, he who neglects to help his brother man, of what ever race, nation, or creed, whenever and wherever he meets suffering, and who turns a deaf ear to the cry of human misery, he who hears an innocent person slandered, whether a brother Theosophist or not, and does not undertake his defense as he would undertake his own, is no Theosophist. Theosophical Literature ISIS Unveiled, a Master Key to the Mysteries of Ancient and Modern Science and Theology by H. P. Blavatsky Vol. I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Volume 2 Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of Theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H. P. Blavatsky Volume L Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume U Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in one cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to The Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above. Reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of Theosophy by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H. P. Blavatsky. A blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H. P. Blavatsky. Reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H. P. Blavatsky. A collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge. A comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the Theosophical movement, widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita rendered into English by William Q. Judge. An ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge. Indian edition Letters That Have Helped Me by W. Q. Judge. American edition, and shorter Indian edition THF. Friendly Philosopher compiled from Letters and Talks by Robert Crosby. 415 pages, cloth. American edition Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition 5 Years of Theosophy Essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560,004 India.